Okay. And I think we're live.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us for this VJUG Book Reading Club session. This is a new series we're going to start now. And we're very happy to be actually live from JFocus. And here?
Where's JFocus?
Yeah, JFocus is in sunny Stockholm. And you're not seeing the weather right now, but it's actually very sunny outside. So if you're expecting to find any snow, you're not going to be able to find it here. Anyway, we're very happy to have with us a really cool guy called Antonio.
Hello.
Oh, well, I think we need to introduce our guest first, right?
Okay.
And Antonio wrote this pretty cool book called Beginning Java E7. I think you have it over there, yes? So Antonio, please talk us a little bit about your book and introduce yourself.
So my name is Antonio Goncalves. I'm a Java champion, Java lover, Paris Jug creator, DevOps France, blah, 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 blah. And I've written the best Java EE book out there. And you can ask Adam Bien or Arun Gupta or, Pilgrim. They all agree that my book is the best Java EE book ever.
I agree. And to run this session, we have other hosts here. So we have Simon with us here on JFocus. Simon,
Hello.
please introduce yourself.
So I created the VJUG many years ago too, and I'm a developer advocate for Zero Turnaround. And we do lots of stuff on the virtual jug. I'm very pleased to have both you and Ivan leading the book club.
It's a pleasure.
I'm just here as a passenger.
Yeah. And of course, we have Ivan that couldn't join us on JFocus, but he's there on sunny Bulgaria as well.
Yeah, so it's Ivan, actually, not Ivan.
Sorry.
Yeah, I work for SAP, and I'm one of the leads in the Bulgarian Java user group, and I'm helping Roberto to facilitate the book reading club of the virtual jug. So, Roberto, would you please introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, so I'm Roberto Cortez, and I'm very happy to bring you the VJUG Book Reading Club session. I work for this awesome company called Tommy Tribe, which is a very cool company because they allow me some time to be here with you guys and work pretty much on Java E stuff. So I'm actually looking forward for this discussion and this conversation because it's one of my main topics of interest. And let's go and start our discussion. So, Ivan, do you want to tell us what we're going to talk today?
Yeah, so today we are reviewing the first 6 chapters from Antonio's book, which is the best book in the world about Java.
There's actually 15 chapters. So we're starting with the 6 first ones.
Yeah, we will be reviewing basically the introduction to Java and the technologies that you can run outside of the Java container, mainly CDI, JPA, and Beam validation. We already have some questions in our meetup page. You can ask questions also in the virtual jug book reading club IRC channel. But I would like to start with a question that I prepared because it's more introductory one, and it's on standards. So, Antonio, some developers say that Java evolves pretty slowly because of the heavy standardization process, while at the same time, stacks like Spring, for example, seem to push new features quite faster. So besides writing this awesome book and speaking at conferences and consulting companies, you are part of the Java specification expert group, right?
Yep, right.
So I can safely assume that you believe in standards.
And I'm not the only one.
Yeah, sure. So why are these standards so important to the Java world?
Well, standards are not important for the Java world. They are important full stop. If I tell you that I'm 1.77 meters, you know what it means. If I tell you that I'm 65 kilograms, you can say first that I'm lying, but you know more or less what it means. If we drink a liter of beer, I won't get drunk, but you know what it means. So, you know, throughout history, we've standardized things. And coming back to things closer to us, we're really, really happy to have a standard HTTP protocol. Imagine if the protocol was different in France and in Bulgaria. It will be a nightmare to talk to each other. So, you know, throughout history, men have standardized things to exchange, really. You know, now we have the metric system and the imperial system. Simon knows that better than us. And it's a pain, you know, it's a pain. We all tell our British friends, come on, guys, just multiply by 10. It's easy.
We're more metric than you guys do.
So
US.
standards are, you know, a way of exchanging. You know, once I took a photo and wrote a blog about it. I was, do you guys have a vacuum cleaner?
Sure.
Do you vacuum clean at home? Do you sometimes get your vacuum cleaner full and you need to change the bag? Have you been to a vacuum cleaner shop and tried to buy a bag? It's amazing. Hundreds. Hundreds of bloody vacuum bags. And when you go there, the guy tells you what the reference, and you go, don't know. And then you have to go back home and take the reference, and you go XYZ 123, and he goes, no, sorry, I don't have it. You have to order it. So it's a pain.
This is interesting because I think it's important about standards as to when things are standardized as well, right? If you standardize too early, you're likely going to get the standard wrong. If you standardize too late, chances are there are so many implementations around. Everyone's already implemented on different instances of that implementation gets wrong than standard. So, you know, the idea of not having a standard and lots of people having lots of those different size with different connectors on a vacuum, that's as a result also of standardizing too late. So when's the right time?
Well, you know, what is the right time? You know, I don't know how long it took to standardize the voltage or to standardize height, but it certainly took centuries. In the Java world and in the development world, it can't take centuries, but it can't either take 6 months. You know, the history of Java EE is roughly 3 years, 3 to 4 years. You have a milestone, a EE milestone. Um, I have to say that the first versions of EE was about standardizing things maybe a bit too early. The perfect example is entity beans. There were already object relational mapping out there even in the Java world. You know, it was coming from the Smalltalk world, but even in Java, we already had frameworks um, closer to Hibernate, closer to JPA, and we standardized something called entity beans, and that was too early, and it was the only experiment, and that was the one who got standardized. Look at the logging framework in Java util, same thing. It got standardized too early. So standards can't come quick. Otherwise, it's like an API. It's there, and you're stuck with it. We've been pruning things still from Java EE6, but it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time. So I would say 3 years, it's kind of okay. If we could keep this pace, it would be nice. Let's Spring and the other frameworks experiment, try things, kill things that don't work, and JPA is the perfect example. Let's standardize things when they have been experimented. We know it works, and then we standardize them. If it's too early, it can damage things, and unfortunately, if it's too late, if it takes too much time, it will damage too. So I don't know what the perfect time would be, but in the Java EE frame, it has been 3 years, sometimes 4, unfortunately, but I would say 3 would be good.
Okay. Grabbing your example about how the JPA evolves, what will be the next thing you would like to see on the JPA for the next spec or the next iteration version?
JPA.
Yeah.
Well,
What there is
well,
in JPA at the moment that we actually think, oh, we should have that in the spec, and this should be standardized? Or do you think like JPA is kind of like a dead spec that doesn't need anything else at the moment?
oh no, no, no. JPA is the perfect, it's the perfect success story of Java EE. We know what an object is. We know what a relational database is. We've been doing mapping for decades. Let's standardize it. So it's, JPA is the perfect thing that has been, the good example of standardizing something. And it's not because we know what an object is and a database is that it can't move. There's still plenty of experiments and features in Hibernate or OpenJPA that could come back to JPA. You know, look at, well, of course, the next version of JPA will map Java 8 dates. That's the minimum that can be done. But we can go further. We've been doing query by examples for decades. Let's standardize that. You were talking about Spring. Spring has a very nice feature that I like. It's Spring Data. In the Java EE world also, in the Delta Spike framework, we have the Delta Spike data, which is basically the same thing. And why not, instead of just sticking to the mapping, let's go up one level. Repository. We all have an entity, and we always have to do CRUD operations and queries. Let's have a CRUD repository. So there's plenty of things that could be done in JPA.
Cool. So I guess that Ivan has a couple of questions about JPA to you, right, Ivan?
Yeah, but let me first ask a question from the meetup comments. It's from Lucas, and it's on JPA again. So what Lucas asks is, I am reading this book, which is pretty good and describes each feature relatively deep. What is good, but I wonder about some features, like for instance, at element collection or at secondary tables, which actually I have never possibility or need to use. In principle, trying to keep things simple and keep mapping similar to database structures. Of course, there are same special cases, but quite rare. What are your experiences and thoughts about it? So I guess he's asking about element collection and secondary tables.
Oh, and I would say element collection and secondary table are easy matches. If you look at the way JPA maps, so you can have a map of where the key is an embeddable and the value is an entity. You can have maps where the key is an entity and the value is a number. Mapping a map is very tricky. So you have dozens of annotation just to map a map. So that is pretty obscure. Hey, that's the beauty of JPA. JPA is strong enough to say, if you start from scratch, if you don't have a legacy database, look how easy it is. No, you don't have to use secondary tables, because we all know it's going to damage performance, because instead of doing one query in one table, you'll do one query in 3 tables. So if you start from scratch, try not to use secondary tables. Element collection is is quite a nice one, actually. But it's not always the case. And actually, I'm working for a customer now where the database is a legacy. And guess what? We can't even touch it. We can't even touch it because there's a legacy system that shares this database. Um, the legacy system, there's no developers anymore, so they are starting to kill it slowly. And but it's going to take a couple of years. And we have this database where we can just add columns and we can't change anything, nothing. So you have to map your Java objects to this database, and you don't have the choice, and you need some flexibility. And if you need to map one entity into three tables, JPA can help you. So, a JPA is first purpose is to map object to a database, no matter what it looks like.
Okay. I hope this answers Lucas' question. Any more questions, Roberto, from the IRC channel?
Keeping the JPA topic, one of the general feelings that I have looking into how people use JPA and how they develop is that most people have a little bit of trouble developing JPA, so they end up saying that JPA sucks because their queries take like 10 minutes or even more when they're performing the queries. And that's because I think that some developers don't really know how JPA behaves, so they end up selecting more that they really want when they're trying to do some piece of code to fix some of their business problems. So what will be your advice to actually say to the community that JPA is actually a very good technology, and how can we train the people to actually know how to use it properly so they don't run into these problems?
Oh, first of all, JPA is a specification. The same query, if you run it in Hibernate, OpenJPA, Eclipse Link, you will have different results. So JPA is just a spec, and it tells you if you do this, if you go select B from book, where, blah, blah, this is, it will retrieve that. It doesn't tell you it will retrieve it in one query or it will retrieve it the best possible way. So JPA is just a specification, and it's amazing to see the differences between implementations. Then it's a, since we've pruned entity beans in the EJB spec, JPA is now the biggest spec of Java EE in terms of pages. So it's a monster because you can map an object in all kind of strange database. And then if you have an entity and you have secondary tables, element collections, and maps, and this and that, and blobs, and you go find it, you will find it. So rule number one is measure, don't guess. I don't know what this query will do in Hibernate, and I think if you are not an Hibernate expert, you don't even know it either. So measure, and the way you measure is increase the logs, of course, and have a look at what's happening. Always have a look at what's happening, and it's interesting because last week I was doing a dojo with my team, and I was taking some queries, and I was doing two things: writing integration tests. Make sure that if you refactor this query, the result will be the same. So connect to a database and make sure the query does that. Then you refactor it and you see if it's still good or not. And the second thing was actually performance tests with JMH, because JMH can be used for anything. And I actually like it to use JMH with frameworks like Hibernate. And there was one method. They were using the Criterions API from Hibernate, and they were doing get this with criteria ordered by date and take the first one. So basically the method was I want to get the last, I want to get the last object. And I took the example where the query was returning 2000 lines. So the query was on the database getting all these data, and the return will do get 0. So
Mhm.
you take this query that brings 200 lines from the database, and you just do, oh, by the way, I just need the first one. Change this query, and the performance was times 6. Just as simple as that. So measure, put the logs on, write integration tests, because unit tests are okay, but with JPA it doesn't help much. Integration test and performance test. Really easy. Measure.
That's a good advice. I it's very common to see stuff like that. I already seen them in some code that I also looked at. Now moving a little bit into other JP aspects, what do you prefer most? Like write a JPTL query or just use the criteria API to do the programmatic query style?
Oh, I think the best thing I've seen was in, at a customer, there was these DAOs, and one guy, used the criteria of API. He was a criteria of API master, and then he left. And there was all these poor guys, and and the methods, the Javadoc on each method was the JPL query. So it was so verbose. Each simple query would take 20 lines, and the Javadoc of these queries was the JPL query. So I found it quite funny, actually. The criteria query is powerful. You can do anything you want, but it's verbose, and we all get lost. Everybody, after 10 lines of code, you get a little bit lost. The nice thing with these criteria is we have seen frameworks on top of the criteria API because it's type safe. And to be honest, I use it a little bit for common things. If you want to create an abstract DAO that for each entity can do a find all or a count all or something, basic stuff, it's actually easier to implement it with the criteria API because subclasses become really type safe, and you can take a DIO and say count all the objects, or count the objects uh, the criteria. So I like to use it a little bit for common things, but otherwise JPQL is okay. Plus, most of the IDEs now can do refactoring on JPQL queries. Most IDEs, I think, except Eclipse.
Yeah. Well, I use both, and general feeling that I have is the criteria API was kind of like a lost opportunity because it's not really a fluent API as you now have with the streams or some other stuff. So you just to like get the object back and keep invoking the methods that you want. And I'm guessing if it was like a more chaining API, it would be much better used and much more fluent and was more easy to use. So I'm guessing it will be simplified, but probably now it's going to be a pain to change that.
Again, there was already fluent APIs in other frameworks, and yeah, I'm not a big fan of the criteria API, to be honest. And now it's there. Um, Either we can write, helper methods to make it slightly smoother, or I don't know. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of the criteria API.
Got a couple of questions in from IRC. One from SivMaker, someone that's got a maker on this. Is the performance of criteria query in JPQL similar or the same? And also, secondly, is your advice to rather not use criteria queries?
Oh, no. Again, code is meant to be read. Once you have a query, you arrive in a project, you see this piece of code, and if you need to refactor this query, first of all, you need to read it and understand it. So that's why I think when criteria API becomes too verbose, you can do anything you want. You can do sub-queries with the criteria API, and it's really, really verbose. So the first thing is you read these 20 lines of code and you will not understand what it does. So yeah, writing JPL queries for the sake of readability, it's something pragmatic. Then in terms of performance, I will go back to the specification and say, I don't know. I don't know, because the spec doesn't tell you that the criteria API should act in a different way of a JPQL query. You can think of it, as a builder. You can actually, it's not specified, but per implementation, you can create a criteria API and go, now give me your JPQL representation. So I don't know, maybe one implementation uses it just as a builder and goes at the end, get string, get JPQL string, and execute it. So I'm not aware of performance benefits of criteria API versus JPQL or name query. And again, the spec doesn't say anything. It will be interesting to do a benchmark in different implementations, but I really doubt that there is much performance improvement.
Yeah, I still expect the performance to be very similar, at least actually the same, but might be some difference between implementation, especially regarding like the parsing of the query and all the introspection that has to be done for the criteria API, but that's like a different topic. Do you have
It's
any?
like, it was like the difference in terms of performance between a name query and a dynamic query. And yes, when you deploy your name query, some implementations can be a bit, can optimize things and cache things, but wow, we are talking
They
about.
get pre-cached on the server boot up or the implementation boot up, so they don't have to parse the query all the time.
But in comparison of, I'm executing this bad query in a huge database, the performance benefits is peanuts.
But I mean, yeah. Anyway, I think it's like a very awesome blog post if someone is up for it, like making the comparison, the criteria API, native query, plus named queries, and all of those.
Looking forward to you writing.
Yeah.
So
I'm just going to add it to my 1,000 list of things to write about.
We've got another question in IRC from SAB or SAB. There's a question about implementation still and around JPA. So JPA is a specification of Java EE. Eclipse link and hibernate to implementations of JPA. Does that mean I'm going to try and say this in a straight face. Does that mean my Java code will be exactly the same if I use Eclipse link or hibernate? And I guess the next question is, how easy is it to migrate between the two?
Oh, that reminds me, when I was writing my book, there was this simple query, I can't remember, I think it was in, like select something where this in country A and country B. I think it was something really, really, really simple. And JPA 2.0, I think, was still being, all the implementations were in beta. And this simple query wasn't running the same way between Hibernate, Eclipse Link, and OpenJPA, because I was actually testing in the three cases. And I was, in one hand, I had the spec saying this is the way it should be written, and I was executing in the three implementation. And one, I actually had an exception. It will just not run. So I opened a case in Hibernate, And the answer was, oh yeah, thank you. Thanks, we've solved the problem. And I was looking at that saying, the TCK really doesn't test much, you know, and uh, and of course you can't write a TCK that will test all the queries. You know, the grammar is too complex, it's too rich, so you can't have a TCK that will test that all these thousands of queries will execute the same way in all the implementation. But I was quite amazed seeing that such a simple query wasn't tested in the TCK.
Yeah. Yes, you have to
So
do some stuff with TCK.
open source TCK, and we contribute, please. Let's do that.
So
Yeah.
how far do you think we've come, and how far do we need to go with TCKs? Because obviously a specification is only as good as its TCK.
Oh, unfortunately, I think the only company that open sources TCK is Red Hat. So you can actually go and have a look at it, and you can, I've never done it, but I'm sure you could easily send a pull request. So that's for CDI and bin validation. And the rest of the TCK, it's hidden in a well, kept by a dragon and a dwarf with a big saw. So,
Actually, IBM's going to do the same for the batch one.
oh, cool.
So why would out of interest, why would a company not open source their TCK? Why it's in it for them to keep it?
Do you know this English pop rock band from the 60s talking about money, get away? I think there's a bit of that involved.
Really, for a TCK, where's the money in that?
Well, yeah,
2 or 3 developers a company a year,
Yeah.
yeah, you can, you know,
maybe more, maybe less.
for some implementations you have to pay to get access to the TCK. And unfortunately, you will not be able to say this implementation is Java E7 certified, because if you want to do that, you will have to go through all the TCKs, and most of them are not open source, and most of them, depending on your license and their license, you'll have to pay for it, and so it's a hidden part of the iceberg. So it's really difficult to say, look, the JPA TCK covers 80% of the spec. No, we don't know. It's you know, the TCK is the dark, um, the dark matter of Java EE, unfortunately.
Cool. So we still have a couple of more questions of JPA, but I really wanted to move to CDI because I think it's a great spec. And that's something that we were missing on the Java world for some time. One general feeling that I have with CDI is that most people don't really understand CDI yet. That's why you still have a lot of sessions on CDI going on, so people can really understand it. And one of the questions I usually get asked the most, and that's the one I'm going to do to you, is what's the difference between an AJB and a CDI beam?
Well, how can I say? You have a container. Let's say this is a container. Let's say this is a Java class. You deploy it in the container. The container doesn't really see it and will not give you many services. Let's say this is the same container, and let's say this is an EJB. You put the EJB inside the container, and the container will go, yes, an EJB. So I'm going to give you transactions. I'm going to give you security. I'm going to give you pooling. I'm going to give you concurrency. I'm going to give you locking. And you go, whoop, 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 whoop. I don't need all that. Yes, but there's more. I can give you MDB, and you go, no, I don't need it. I don't need it. So CDI means, is a little bit, give me a few services, but not many. And if I need more, I will add them. The perfect example is transaction. Transactions, thank God, in Java 7 have been implemented in JTA using a CDI interceptor. So now, for you Spring folks, you can have at transactional. which is amazing. Before in Java E6, it was at stateless. What was at stateless? A service only given to an EJB. What is transactional? It's actually a CDI interceptor that can be used in anything, in a servlet, in a Java class, anywhere. So the difference between an EJB and a CDI bean is EJB was just too many services, and CDI is actually only a few: injection, lifecycle, interception only. And if you want more, you can add more. And, as I always say, EJB was a fantastic technology 15 years ago. In only one class, okay, one class and two interfaces, um, you could get all these services. Today, history has changed, and we want to keep things small, shrink them, be quick, be fast. And now the way to go is take a bin, and if you need transaction, just write at transactional, and you will only get this service. And this is the way to go. I hope the integration with JMS and CDI will finally work out in EE8, because it will be the same idea. If you want to be a listener, just use this annotation, and that's it. And you don't need all the rest of the services. So a CDI bean is a very lightweight component where you can add things instead of trying to shrink them back, which is impossible with an EJB anyway.
And that was an awesome explanation. Thank you, Antonio. But on the other hand, do you still think about use cases where you're still going to use an HAB when you're coding right now?
Yes, unfortunately. I'm saying unfortunately because, as I said, EJB is a fantastic specification. It was created nearly 20 years ago. But unfortunately, we took too long to take all the services out of the EJB. Transaction is one. At stateless, of course, the transaction part is in JTA, but you don't use it, just too much hassle. It was the EJB component that would make things easier with at stateless. We took too much time to take this simplicity out of EJB and putting it back to where it belongs in JTA. So think of at transactional. We take this service out of EJB and put it where it belongs. And now we have to do that with all the EJB services. Schedule. If you want to schedule a task, print a report every Wednesday at 2 p.m., you can only do that if it's an EJB, because the add schedule only works on an EJB. So let's take it out and put it somewhere else. At asynchronous, fantastic. You call a method and it's invoked asynchronously. That is very dead simple. You just write at asynchronous. But you can only do that in an EJB. Take it out, put it back to Java EE concurrency, and let's be used by everything. So the problem we have now is there are few services that are only usable in an EJB. So that's why now people mix and mix things. I hope that the final development model of Java EE will be: this is a class and these are the services, and put the services you need. But it's going to take time.
Okay, so do you expect that, probably not in the near future, but sometime in the future, HAB is going to be deprecated and replaced by CDI?
No, never do that, because otherwise the CDI spec will just grow and grow and grow. No. The transactional example I was giving is the perfect example. It's implemented with CDI, so it's implemented as a CDI interceptor, but it's in the JTA spec, not in the CDI spec.
Yeah, I was not speaking about having everything on the CDI spec, but probably like outsource the AJB services to separate specs. Like you can have like a timer and schedule spec. I'm not sure if that makes sense or not, but just an example. And you take all these specs out from the AJBs, and in the end, you might be able to transform a CDI bin into an AJB bin just with the CDI annotations and putting all the specs there.
Exactly.
Or maybe something different that I read elsewhere. What does a stateless session EJB mean? It's as you said, transactions, then security, then pooling, then what else? Locking. So if you implement all these, even in the EJB spec, like the transactional was implemented as a CDI interceptor. So if you implement pooling and security as an CDI interceptors, and then if you create a stateless stereotype that groups all these CDI stereotype that groups all these interceptors into one, and put this in a different spec, maybe the EJB spec or in some new spec, not in the CDI, which is providing just the services of stereotypes and interceptors. So what's your opinion about this idea? Can we upgrade, so to say, EJB to stick to the CDI model?
It's funny the example that you were giving because I can even find a pointer where we were talking about that during Java EE7. It's a very old topic. You know, a lot of people would like to have a CDI as the development model. And a servlet should be, at web servlet should be a stereotype. At stateless should be a stereotype. At stateful should be a stereotype. So the idea that some people have is let's use the CDI model also as an integration point. The entire Java EE uses this model. Let's put things back to where they are. And as you say, if you take @pooled, well, @pooled could be an annotation in the Java EE concurrency implemented with CDI. And in the EJB spec, we will just have @stateless, which is a stereotype aggregating pooled and other stuff. So that's a vision we've had for years. We've been this particular example that you were giving. We were talking about that in the mailing list 4 years ago.
Awesome.
So yeah, is it going to happen, or you don't think so?
Okay, so either I speak, I give my opinion, and it can be rough, or I just go, Kee! Joker.
So we are a joke. You can give your opinion.
No, a lot of people would love that to happen, really. But hey, hello, hello.
Thank you so much for joining us.
For those of the big jug, this is Matthias.
Yeah, he's the head of JFocus, so we have to thank him.
I'm finally at JFocus.
Yeah,
Online. You should come here, right?
yeah.
Of course, I would love to come, but every year there's a problem. God, you're gonna hate me for that. Next year.
Next year.
So yeah, a lot of people would love to use the CDI as a programming model.
Yeah, actually, one complaining that we need like more CDI talks, and JFocus didn't have one, so we need to bring one CDI talk next year.
We have another question on IRC from Jigar, who has an annotation question. When should Jigar use @ID class, and when should he use embeddable or embeddable ID? What's the difference, pros, cons?
Oh, again, when you don't have the choice, imagine, I've never used ID class, in JPA, never. Embedded ID, much simpler, even in terms of writing a query, much simpler. But imagine that this ID, which is made of three attributes, is in a class, and this class is somewhere in a package where you don't have access. That's the only use case of using ID class instead of embedded ID. With ID class, you can say the ID of this entity is made of attribute A, B, C. They are in this class. I don't have the code of this class, so I can't change the code of this class, so I can't even put an annotation on this class. I just have the bytecode. And that's the only way you will have is to say ID class and point to the attribute ABC of the other class. Otherwise, just use embedded ID because it's nicer, cleaner, even even for your queries. When you do a select something where and you put this embedded ID, even the query will be easier to write. So choice number one, embedded ID. And if you can't, if this embedded ID is a Java 4, you don't have annotations, it's in the jar class, you just have the bytecode, use ID class.
A couple of fun statements.
Oh yeah, I'm seeing like a controversial statement here. It's going to generate a lot of discussion.
Go, go, go.
So the question I'll ask, because they're just statements, the question I'll ask is how much truth is in these statements? And I'm sure I'll know which you agree with. So on Ollie's side, we have CDI is basically a broken version of the Spring DI container. CivMaker says Spring is just an incubator for Java EE concepts.
Here we go with the Spring and Java EE discussion.
Yeah.
Oh God, Spring and Java EE discussion. Actually, when I was at Devox Belgium a few months ago, I spent an entire afternoon with Jürgen Uller, and we were talking about synergies that could happen between CDI and Spring. Not that easy, but we actually thought of a couple. Spring is a sandbox for Java EE? Yes, of course. And I would like to thank these guys. Remember the EJB2 model? That was at the time where Rod Johnson wrote a fantastic book and was saying basically we don't need the EJB model, it's broken. And Java EE5 arrived with a lot of inspiration from Spring. So thank you, Spring, and thank you for the other frameworks. I was talking about Hibernate, yes, but remember Toplink. Toplink was created in '94 for Smalltalk, before Java. So thank you, Toplink, thank you, Hibernate, and thank you, everybody that innovates outside Java EE. And then Java EE goes, that's good, I'm going to take that. So Java Spring is a play for Java EE, yes, because they can innovate much faster. And then when we arrive with JPA, they go, thank you, we're going to integrate that. So Spring integration with JPA or JMS or things like that are easy, and they make the most of it. Spring integration with CDI, it won't happen. The models are too close. But coming back to the first question, CDI is a broken version of Spring. I would say no, my friend. The EJB model was old, and the Spring model arrived in 2003 and refreshed Java EE and the EJB model. CDI is born in 2006. After Spring, after the XML, CDI grew up with annotation. There's no XML in CDI. And now, if you think of the history of EJBs had to carry their model for many, many years. Spring now has to carry his model for many, many years. I still see Spring 4 a project with thousands of XML, thousands, dozens of thousands, really, because people were using that back in 2003. And unfortunately, they didn't have time and the money to refactor everything. So you have bits of new Spring and bits of old Spring. And old Spring needs to work with new Spring until they hopefully break the compatibility. That was one topic, maybe with Spring 5. So no, I disagree. The technology is like that. And look at Dagger. Dagger again arrived after Juice, after CDI. So the model is even different. Look at Dagger and look at Spring. The performance of Dagger is hundreds of times faster than Spring. There's no proxies, there's no nothing. So now CDI is just based on a new programming model than Spring, and CDI is type safe per se. It's DNA. It's not the case of Spring. And why is the integration completely impossible between Spring and CDI? I'm not saying it will never happen, but it doesn't happen, and it won't happen in the near versions because even the injection algorithms are completely different. When we were talking with Jürgen Uller at Devox Belgium, he was explaining the in-depth algorithm of bin lookup in Spring. It's completely different of CDI. Spring based things on name. That's the first thing. The first resolution is name, then comes type, then comes this, then comes that. In CDI is type and qualifier. There's no name. So that the two approaches are unfortunately too different, and they do the same thing but in very different ways. So the integration between both is unfortunately difficult. But CDI came after with a fresher, newer, type safer model than Spring.
So we have a question here regarding also your conversation about all the XML that Spring brought first, and then how we got rid of that. So actually, Lalwani is asking, is CDI with no XML?
Yeah, there's only a few. CDI 1.2, so the latest version, you don't even need a bins XML. But of course, in most of the times you need. But with CDI, you can get very low XML. The only spec now, Java EE spec that needs XML is JPA. I don't even know why. Because
Yeah,
you have
actually, we have a previous question over here asking why did you have a persistent XML? Shouldn't we get rid of that as well?
Yeah, it would be good. I don't see the point. We have now a default data source.
Yeah, and
We don't even have to name it. So I don't even know why we need a persistence XML. We don't need bins XML anymore. But yes, of course, when you go to more complex use cases like the web XML, we don't need web XMLs anymore. But when you integrate different things, you end up having to go back to web XML to order filters, etc., etc. And actually, one thing in the future of CDI is to have more XML. That is a proposition in 2.1, not in 2.0, but in 2.1 we were actually thinking of having the same idea in the servlet where you have a web XML and a web fragment. Because now the problem with CDI is when you have a WAR file with different jars in it, and each jar has CDI with a bins XML, and you want to exclude things, etc., etc. So actually, you don't need XML in Java EE, roughly. But when you work in big projects, yeah, you end up with XML. And we can see the benefit of having a little bit more XML in CDI. So maybe in the future.
Cool.
XML.
Yeah. So we run out of time. But 1 minute left. So we're gonna wrap it right here. I know that you have to go, Antonio.
Yes, I have to go and pick up my daughter.
Yes. So thank you so much for joining us for this session, and thank you so much for your awesome answers to our viewers' questions. Thank you so much for our other hosts, Ivan and Simon, for being here with me.
Thank you guys for having me. Thank you, J Focus. I will go there one day. I promise. I
Thank you,
promise.
Focus audience, for being here with us, and we hope to
Hello,
have.
everybody.
Yeah.
Also thanks to Stephen Chin and Night Hacking for,
Oh, yeah.
for owning the stage, and thanks to
And thanks to Matthias as well. We'll definitely have Antonio here next.
Au revoir, Antonio.
Au revoir. Adeus. Até a próxima. Au revoir, tout le monde. Ciao, ciao.
So you can watch the replay of this session on virtualjet.com. Is that correct, Simon?
Yep.
Yeah, and we're gonna schedule a second and a third session with Antonio to continue on other topics on his book. So please check Meetup website until we schedule the next session. It's gonna be following in 2 or 3 weeks, and see you back then. So thank you so much, guys.
And thank you, Roberto.
Bye, everybody. Thank you guys for
Thank you,
having me.
Antonio. Bye-bye.
Bye.